Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are looking into the latest Gran Turismo 152 update and I've got all of the details you need to know. We've got some new cars, some interesting tweaks to GT Sophy and changes, again, to the physics model that could affect your gameplay. While this isn't a massive change, there are a few things worth talking about. Besides, of course, the I'm gonna say the new Toyota Hiace van. So let's begin. We'll start with the new cars. One of the first things you'll notice in this update is addition of 3 new cars. First of all, we got the new Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 8. So next up is the Nissan GT-R 2024 edition, and this car is also featured in the new Lap Time Challenge event. Not the easiest car to drive, but once you get used to it, it can run some pretty serious lap times. And of course, the new Toyota Hiace Gran Turismo van. I don't really need to talk too much about the van. Sure, it's not the fastest and the most agile car in the game, but it's one of the icons and probably it deserves a spot in a racing, I would say a racing car culture game like Gran Turismo 7. Now let's talk about GT Sophy. With the update 152, GT Sophy is now compatible with 2 new tracks. So we are talking about Brent's GP Circuit and Dragon Trail Seaside. And of course, I would really like to mention the new physics model. One of the most technical things or technical changes in this update is adjustment to the car physics. Again, specifically the tweaks to the front lift during cornering and oversteer during braking. Now, I've tested these changes, and while they are really not that game-changing, they do make a little bit of difference with some cars. To be specific, MR cars in general, like the Porsche, feel a little bit more stable. I was able to push these cars closer to their limit without losing control as easily. And that's a great improvement if you ask me. On the other hand, front engine, rear-wheel drive cars like basically FR cars, didn't seem to be that much affected with this update. They handle pretty much the same as before, which is kind of good news if you're already used to their handling. And again, these are minor adjustments, but they're enough to address some kind of, I would say, very small tweaks that you need to apply. And of course, cornering and I would say braking dynamics definitely changed. And so did the ABS system. Now, this is probably the most, or I would say the biggest impact in this change. So we're talking about ABS system. Before the 152, most players used the default ABS settings because it was the safest and the fastest option for most situations. But after this update, the weak ABS setting has now once again become a viable option for some cars. And this is what I found. If you're driving a car with stiff suspension and racing tires, you can use weak ABS, and it actually works a little bit better and you have more rotation under braking. And in this run, I decided to use weak ABS with this Supra. So this is a Group 3 car. It's a very stable, usually a very stiff car on racing medium tires. So I have a lot of grip and I can definitely use a little bit more rotation. So you can see, even in these kind of tighter corners, you can see that I'm downshifting into first gear, using a little bit of, I would say, trail braking in that section, but it's really nothing that special. So my point was just to try to get onto the brakes a little bit later, so I can actually brake a little bit later with the weak ABS and get more rotation when I'm entering the corner. So, of course, I need to trail brake, I need to modify my braking inputs and so on, and I need to, of course, make the car stable, but kind of little adjustments of my steering inputs. So, third gear on the way out, nothing much to do there, but the important part was that I was constantly gaining in, well, corners where I was usually losing time. So, you can lose the car, you can be very careful, and you can still lose the car in some corners, but you have to readjust your braking, and if you readjust your braking in a good way, you can eventually qualify and get a pretty solid result. This can help you to maintain control in tighter corners, but it's also making the car a little bit more difficult to drive. So it's kind of a trade-off if you want stability and cornering speed. So I tested this in the recent time trial where I had to use the sport tires and the extra grip just wasn't there. In that case, I stuck and got back to default ABS, and it worked really well. And so I tried to use weak ABS with this new GTR in the lap time challenge, using, of course, sport medium tires. So these tires do not provide the same level of grip, of course, as the racing tires, and you have to be a little bit more careful on how you apply the brakes. And now you can see, even in this corner, even though I'm not applying that much braking, the car still slides. And then when I get under the brakes pretty hard, you can see how much this car starts to slide. So it's a big difference while using road cars, or maybe using racing cars, for example, like it was the case with the Supra. But then I decided to try it with default ABS, and all of a sudden I'm not getting the same amount of rotation in slow corners, but at the same time I have kind of more control of the car doesn't slide that much, and it's more stable. So it's really about what do you need. Do you need stability, or do you need to get a little bit more rotation in the corner? So for this one, I would definitely advise to use default, because it's kind of the best option for this specific car. So you can see, even in this corner, which is usually a tighter turn, with weak ABS, I would most likely slide. This car slides, it still slides, but not slide as much. And this is very important if you want to kind of get that control and really move this car on this track, which again, it's a pretty difficult thing to do. So I was running at 33.0 with default ABS, and then in this try I started to improve even further. So it was actually a pretty solid result. And that rotation, you don't really need it in here. You need a bit of rotation, but most of all, you need stability, especially if you're, of course, on the curb and if you don't want this car to slide that much. Of course, gearing meant that I kind of had to be a little bit more precise, but kind of messed up my last corner here, but still, it was a good run. So it's important to experiment. If you're driving a car with a stiff setup and the car feels like you need a little bit more rotation under braking, weak setup or weak ABS is the way to go. But for most players, sticking with default ABS, in my opinion, still is the best option. And some other adjustments are, for those of you that are using FANATEC podium setups, there is a small but useful change in this update as well. The auto setup settings on the FANATEC podium has been fine-tuned to better suit the torque mode. If you're using high torque mode, selecting auto setup will now automatically adjust the parameters for you. We've also got some minor, I would say very minor, but useful update to Eiger Norwand reverse track. The surface paint area at the pit entry has been extended to improve their visibility. Although this is not a big change, but it can improve the visibility on Eiger Norwand. So in the end, I would say this is not a game-changing update. Not really, but it's okay. What update 152 does is provide a series of small quality improvements, like the ones that you see with the physics tweak and the ABS adjustments. So it might not seem huge, but they are definitely noticed by players who want to push their cars to the limit even further. So all in all, I would say it's a solid update, even though it's not the biggest one that we've seen. In the end, I would really like to have your thoughts down in the comments, and please let me know what you think about this update and if this update was worth for you or not. So once again, I really hope that you enjoyed in this video, and if you did, click that like button. You might even want to subscribe if you really like it, and of course, until the next time, bye.